Blazing with 1,000 candles was the grand ballroom of Blackwood, their flames dancing in crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations above the assembled ton. Silk gowns swirled across the polished floor as couples waltzed, laughter and gossip mingling with the orchestra's soaring strains. A masquerade where alliances formed and reputations shattered. Yet time fractured. Lord Damien Blackwood stood rigid amid the throng, midnight blue coat hugging broad shoulders, cravat tight as a noose. Dark hair fell awry, framing high cheekbones, a scarred cheek, and storm-gray eyes burning with hidden turmoil. In his gloved hand, champagne trembled. Across the room, Miss Eleanor Harrington, merchant's daughter of practical grace, stood defiant on the dais. "Lord Blackwood has not seduced me," she declared, voice ringing clear. "I have seduced him." The words exploded like cannon fire. Gasps rippled. Fans snapped open. A violin screeched. Damien's heart thundered. Lord Archibald Vance smirked from the shadows, his venomous accusations now eclipsed by Eleanor's sacrifice. She who had seen his debts, his despair, and chosen him anyway. As the ton erupted, Damien strode forward, seizing her hand. "And I," he proclaimed, "am the most fortunate man alive for it." In his gray eyes, locked on hers, ruin gave way to redemption's fierce dawn. If this tempest of passion has ensnared you, subscribe now. The secrets ahead will leave you breathless. The library at Blackwood Hall was a cavern of silence, its vast shelves rising like ancient sentinels into the shadowed heights of the vaulted ceiling. Leather-bound volumes, many untouched for decades, gleamed dully in the weak afternoon light that struggled through tall, mullioned windows half obscured by heavy brocade curtains. The air carried the faint must of old paper and polished oak, mingled with the sharper bite of brandy that lingered in a crystal decanter on the side table. Lord Damien Blackwood occupied the deep leather armchair by the cold hearth as though it were both throne and prison. His long frame sprawled in deliberate disarray, one boot propped on a footstool, the other stretched toward the empty grate. His coat of midnight superfine lay discarded over a nearby chair. The charcoal waistcoat was unbuttoned, the white linen shirt open at the throat where the cravat had been tugged loose and abandoned. Dark hair, thick and slightly wavy, fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he had raked his fingers through it one too many times. The sharp planes of his face, high cheekbones, a firm jaw shadowed with the beginnings of stubble, were etched with exhaustion, and a thin scar traced a pale line along his left cheekbone, catching the light whenever he turned his head. In his right hand he held the decanter itself now, having forsaken the glass. Amber liquid sloshed gently as he raised it to his lips, the burn down his throat a familiar, fleeting distraction from the ache that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. 2 years. 2 years since his father's sudden death had thrust the viscountcy upon him, and only in the past 6 months had the full extent of the catastrophe revealed itself. Ledgers hidden in locked drawers. Promissory notes tucked behind false panels in the late Viscount's study. Debts that spiraled into tens of thousands. Gambling losses, reckless investments, mortgages on properties Damien had believed unencumbered. The Blackwood fortune, once the envy of the ton, had been systematically bled dry by a man whose charm had masked a devastating weakness. Damien's gray eyes, stormy and unreadable, stared into the empty fireplace as though answers might materialize from the ashes. He had spent his youth abroad, Italy, Greece, the continent, believing the tales his mother fed him of a robust estate awaiting his return. Instead, he had come home to ruin carefully concealed behind a facade of grandeur. Downstairs, the breakfast room offered a stark contrast to his solitude. Lady Eleanora Blackwood, the Dowager Countess, presided over the table with the quiet authority that had sustained the family through grief and uncertainty. At 52 she remained strikingly handsome. Silver threads wove through her once jet hair, drawn back in a severe yet elegant knot. Her posture was flawless, her lavender morning gown chosen with care to convey both mourning and resilience. She poured tea with steady hands, though her sharp blue eyes betrayed the calculations turning behind them. Opposite her sat Miss Lydia Blackwood, 18 and radiant with the unspoiled optimism of a first season. Golden curls framed a heart-shaped face. Her pink muslin dress was trimmed with lace that fluttered whenever she gestured. "Mother, do you truly believe the Harringtons will accept? Imagine new money in our very halls. It shall be the talk of the county." Lady Eleanor's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "It shall indeed, Lydia. But talk can be shaped, and Mr. Theodore Harrington's wealth is considerable. His mills supply half the fashionable gowns in London. A partnership could secure our future." Lydia's eyes widened. "And his daughters? The eldest is said to be quite plain but sensible. The younger is to make her debut. Perhaps she will be a friend to me." "Perhaps," Lady Eleanor replied, though her thoughts were fixed on her son. Damien had withdrawn deeper into himself since discovering the true state of their affairs. Nights spent in the library with brandy for company. Days spent riding the estate until exhaustion claimed him. She had shielded him as long as she could, drawing on her own settlement to pay the most pressing creditors, but the reserves dwindled. The butler entered with measured steps, bearing a silver salver. "A letter, my lady, from Mr. Harrington." Lady Eleanor broke the seal with deliberate calm. The words within confirmed her hopes. Acceptance of the invitation to reside at Blackwood Hall for the season, a willingness to discuss investment in the remaining Blackwood mills, and, most crucially, an implication that closer ties might be welcomed. She folded the letter carefully. "They arrive within a fortnight." Lydia clapped her hands. "Oh, how exciting! New faces, new gowns. Perhaps even new suitors." Lady Eleanor's gaze drifted to the empty place at the head of the table. "Yes," she said softly. "New beginnings." Upstairs, Damien set the decanter down with a heavy clink. He rose, restless, crossing to the window that overlooked the south lawn. The gardens were still beautiful, his mother's doing, but beyond them the fields showed signs of neglect. Hedgerows overgrown, drainage ditches clogged. Tenants had begun to grumble. Creditors' letters arrived weekly. He pressed a palm to the cool glass. Pride had kept him from confessing the full extent to his mother. Shame had kept him from seeking help beyond her discreet assistance. The Blackwood name had endured centuries of war, plague, and political upheaval. He would not be the Viscount who let it crumble. Yet every path seemed barred. Marriage to an heiress was the obvious solution. The ton was full of ambitious fathers eager to buy a title with their daughters' dowries. But the thought of binding himself to a stranger for money twisted like a knife. He had seen his father's charm used as currency. He would not repeat the pattern. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Hargrove entered with a tray. Fresh coffee, toast, eggs he would not eat. "Your ladyship requests your presence at luncheon, my lord. She has news." Damien's mouth twisted. "News," he echoed. His mother's letters to industrialists had not escaped his notice. "Inform her I shall join the family shortly." As the door closed, he turned back to the window. In the distance, clouds gathered over the hills, a storm approaching. Fitting, he thought. The Harringtons would bring their brash new wealth into his crumbling world, and he would have to smile and pretend it did not chafe. He straightened his waistcoat, retied the cravat with impatient tugs, and schooled his features into the mask of aristocratic indifference he had perfected. Whatever scheme his mother had devised, he would endure it. For Lydia's season, for the estate, for the name he carried like a weight. But deep in those storm-gray eyes, a flicker of dread remained. Change was coming to Blackwood Hall, practical, unapologetic, and utterly unstoppable in the form of a merchant's daughter who would soon walk these halls and see straight through every defense he had built. What would you sacrifice to save everything you've ever known? Comment below. I'm eager to hear your thoughts as this story unfolds. The house had long settled into the hush of midnight when Eleanor Harrington slipped from her guest chamber, a single candle in hand casting wavering shadows along the corridor. Sleep had eluded her. The unfamiliar opulence of Blackwood Hall pressed in from all sides, silk draperies too heavy, the bed too vast, the silence too complete. At home in their Manchester townhouse, she could hear the distant clatter of carts or the muffled voices of servants. Here, only the occasional creak of old would disturb the stillness. She had come for a book, something dull enough to lull her restless mind. The library had been pointed out during the afternoon tour. A cavernous room on the ground floor, lined floor to ceiling with volumes accumulated over centuries. The great oak door opened without a sound. Inside, moonlight spilled through tall windows in pale silver bars, illuminating dust motes that drifted like ghosts. The scent of leather, aged paper, and faint tobacco hung in the air. Eleanor lifted her candle higher, its flame revealing row upon row of gilded spines. She had taken no more than 3 steps when a low voice cut through the darkness. "You're not the footman." Eleanor froze. In the great leather armchair beside the cold fireplace lounged a figure she had glimpsed only briefly at tea, Lord Damien Blackwood himself. He was half reclined, one leg draped over the arm of the chair, the other stretched out. His cravat was gone entirely, shirt open at the throat. The charcoal waistcoat hung unbuttoned. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and in the dim light his eyes glinted like polished steel. A near-empty brandy decanter rested on the table beside him, a single glass cradled loosely in his long fingers. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she became acutely aware of her attire. A simple wool dressing gown over her night rail, hair braided loosely down her back, feet in soft slippers. Hardly proper for an encounter with the master of the house. I beg your pardon, my lord," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort. "I could not sleep and thought to borrow a book. I believed the house asleep." Damien's mouth curved in a humorless half-smile. "The house may sleep. Its master does not." He raised the glass in a mocking salute. "Which Harrington are you? The pretty one destined for conquest, or the sensible one?" The word stung, deliberate and sharp. Eleanor lifted her chin. "The sensible one, my lord. Miss Eleanor Harrington. And you, I presume, are Lord Blackwood, the gentleman whose reputation precedes him even to Manchester." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant amusement. He straightened slightly, though the posture remained one of calculated indolence. "Touché. You've heard the tales, then. Rake, gambler, disgrace to the name. All true, depending on whom you ask." "I ask no one," Eleanor replied. "I prefer facts to gossip." She gestured toward the shelves. "If you will permit me, I shall choose a volume and retreat." He waved a languid hand. "Choose what you like, though I warn you, most of these tomes are drier than the brandy." His gaze sharpened as she moved toward the nearest shelf. What keeps a sensible merchant's daughter awake in a strange house? Eleanor scanned titles without truly seeing them. Agricultural treatises, sermons, volumes of poetry in Greek. "Unfamiliar surroundings," she said at last. "And perhaps concern for my family's welcome here. Alliances of this sort are delicate." Damien laughed softly, the sound bitter. "Delicate, an apt word. My mother believes your father's gold can polish our tarnished name. I wonder what your father believes my name can do for his daughter's prospects." She turned to face him fully, candle steady in her grip. "He believes it can open doors that coin alone cannot. And he is not wrong." "No," Damien conceded, his voice dropping. "He is not." He studied her in the shifting light, the quiet composure, the direct gaze that met his without flinching. Most women simpered or flirted. This one assessed him as coolly as she might a balance sheet. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Eleanor selected a volume at random, something on crop rotation, suitably soporific, and turned toward the door. But something in the slump of his shoulders, the hollow note beneath his cynicism, stayed her steps. "You disapprove of the alliance," she said quietly. It was not a question. His eyes narrowed. "I disapprove of necessity masquerading as choice." "Yet necessity often forces clarity," she countered. "Better to face it honestly than drown it in brandy." The words hung between them. Damien's fingers tightened on the glass. For a moment the mask slipped, revealing raw weariness and something darker. Shame, perhaps, or fury at his own helplessness. "You speak boldly for a guest in my house." "I speak plainly because falsehoods waste time," Eleanor replied. "And time, my lord, is a commodity neither of us can afford to squander." Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Damien inclined his head, a gesture almost of respect. "Take your book, Miss Harrington, and perhaps take my advice. Avoid darkened rooms where the master of the house drinks alone. Some reputations are earned." Eleanor met his gaze one last moment. "I judge reputations by actions, not warnings." She left him then, the candle flame steady as she retreated down the corridor. Behind her, Damien stared into the empty grate, the echo of her words lingering like smoke. In the safety of her chamber, Eleanor opened the book and found she could not read a single line. Her pulse still raced, not from fear, but from the electric awareness of a man teetering on the edge of ruin, and the dangerous suspicion that she might be the sort who could not resist reaching out to steady him. Would you confront a stranger's pain in the dead of night, or walk away? Tell me your choice in the comments as the sparks begin to fly. The afternoons at Blackwood Hall soon fell into a quiet rhythm born of necessity. While Lydia and Clara giggled over fashion plates in the morning room, and the elder Harringtons conferred with Lady Eleonora on matters of investment and society, Damien found himself drawn, reluctantly, repeatedly, to the small study adjacent to the library. It began innocently enough. Lady Eleonora, ever the strategist, suggested that Miss Eleanor Harrington might assist with the estate correspondence, given her familiarity with ledgers and accounts. "A fresh pair of eyes," she had said over breakfast, her tone leaving no room for refusal. Damien had inclined his head in stiff agreement, expecting little more than polite inefficiency. He had been wrong. Eleanor arrived promptly each afternoon at 2, armed with a neat portfolio, inkpot, and a calm competence that unsettled him more than any flirtation ever could. She wore simple day dresses, soft gray or muted blue, that skimmed her figure without ostentation. Her auburn hair pinned severely yet with a few rebellious strands that caught the sunlight. She greeted him with a composed, "Good afternoon, my lord," and settled at the desk opposite his without waiting for invitation. At first he maintained a cool distance, dictating letters to tenants or creditors while she transcribed in a clear, rapid hand. But curiosity, irritating and persistent, drew his gaze to her work. She did not merely copy. She questioned, quietly, precisely. "This lease renewal for the Eastern Farms," she said one day, pen pausing. "The rent has not increased in 12 years, yet costs have risen. A modest adjustment might ease the estate's strain without hardship to the tenants." Damien's brows lifted. "You presume much for a guest." "I observe," she corrected mildly. "And numbers do not lie, even when pride prefers silence." He should have dismissed her impertinence. Instead he leaned forward, scanning the figures she indicated. She was right. The rents were outdated, a relic of his grandfather's leniency. A small increase, carefully phased, could yield hundreds annually. From that moment, the pretense of mere correspondence crumbled. Eleanor began reviewing the estate books he reluctantly produced, ledgers he had pored over alone in the dead of night, cursing his father's reckless scrawl. She worked methodically, her slim fingers tracing columns of ink, her brow furrowing only slightly when the extent of the damage revealed itself. She never gasped or pitted. She simply noted, calculated, suggested. One rain-lashed afternoon, as thunder rumbled over the hills, she closed the final volume and looked up. Damien sat across from her, arms folded, waiting for the verdict he both craved and dreaded. "The situation is grave," she said plainly, "but not hopeless. Your father's debts total near 35,000, secured against unentailed properties and future revenues. Yet the core estate, Blackwood Hall and the home farms, remains intact. Income is insufficient, but not irretrievable." He laughed, a low, bitter sound. "A merchant's optimism. The Ton calls it ruin. The Ton calls many things ruin that merely require discipline." Her emerald eyes met his without flinching. "Reduce expenditures entertaining the London house, unnecessary staff. Renegotiate terms with creditors. Many prefer gradual repayment to scandal. Invest cautiously in your remaining mills with my father's capital. Within 10 years. 10 years, he interrupted, rising to pace the room. A decade of scraping and bowing to trade. A decade of survival, she countered quietly. Better than the alternative. He stopped at the window, staring out at the storm. Rain lashed the glass in sheets, blurring the gardens into gray. "And what alternative do you imagine, Miss Harrington?" "That I sell myself to the highest bidder. An heiress with a fat dowry and empty head." She was silent long enough that he turned. Her expression had softened, something almost tender in the set of her mouth. "I imagine no such thing," she said at last. "I have seen men marry for money. It rarely ends in anything but resentment. But neither do I believe pride should condemn an entire family to collapse." Damien's chest tightened. No one, not his mother, not his stewards, had spoken to him with such unflinching clarity. They tiptoed around the shame of his inheritance. Eleanor laid it bare and offered a ladder out of the pit. He returned to the desk, leaning forward on his palms. "Then what do you propose, beyond discipline and patience?" Her gaze did not waver. "Partnership, real partnership. My father's resources, your name and land. A clear plan, executed without illusion. And," she hesitated, the first crack in her composure, "trust, between those who share the burden." The word hung between them, trust, an intimacy neither had earned nor expected. Damien studied her face. The faint flush on her cheeks, the steady resolve in her eyes. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on his shoulders seemed shared. "Very well," he said slowly. "Show me your plan." Over the following weeks, the study became their domain. Spreadsheets replaced correspondence. Projections and negotiations filled the hours. Eleanor's mind was a revelation. Sharp, pragmatic, yet never cruel. She found efficiencies he had overlooked, proposed investments that balanced risk and reward. And gradually, inevitably, the barriers between them thinned. One evening, as lamplight flickered over scattered papers, she looked up with a rare, genuine smile. "The Northern Mill could double output with new looms. My father has the contacts. Within 3 years, it could clear a third of the debt." Damien exhaled, a sound perilously close to hope. "You make it sound possible." "It is possible," she insisted. "Difficult, but possible." He reached across the desk, his fingers brushing hers as he took the page she offered. The touch lingered, accidental, then deliberate. Neither withdrew. In that quiet moment, with rain soft against the windows and the future sketched in ink between them, something irrevocable shifted. The Viscount who had armored himself in cynicism and the merchant's daughter who had armored herself in competence recognized, without words, that they had become allies in more than mere finance. And alliances, once forged in trust, have a way of deepening into something far more dangerous. If you were facing ruin, would you accept help from the one person who truly sees your weakness? Share your answer below, the stakes are rising. The season in London had begun in earnest, and Blackwood House in Mayfair, preserved by Lady Eleanor's marriage settlement, became a whirlwind of silk, candlelight, and calculated ambition. Balls, soirees, and morning calls filled the days. The Harrington sisters, under the Dowager's formidable patronage, were launched into society with a brilliance that silenced most whispers of trade. Clara bloomed like a hothouse rose, surrounded by admirers. Eleanor, ever the quiet shadow, chaperoned, smiled politely, and deflected attention with practiced ease. Yet wherever she went, she felt Damien's gaze upon her. Steady, intense, impossible to ignore. Their afternoons in the library continued whenever the family was in residence, though now the work carried a new charge. What had begun as cool collaboration had warmed into something neither dared name. A brush of fingers over a ledger page lingered half a second too long. A shared glance across a crowded drawing room held entire conversations. When Damien leaned over her shoulder to examine a column of figures, his breath stirred the fine hairs at her temple, and she felt it like a brand. One warm June evening, after a particularly glittering ball at the Duke of Rothmere's, the house finally quieted. Eleanor, unable to sleep, slipped downstairs once more, this time knowingly, drawn by the faint glow beneath the library door. Damien was there, as she had half hoped, half feared. He stood by the open window, coat discarded, waistcoat unbuttoned, staring out at the moonlit garden. The brandy decanter remained on the table, but untouched. The glass beside it held only water. He turned as she entered, gray eyes catching the candlelight. "You should be abed, Miss Harrington." "So should you, my lord." She closed the door softly behind her. "Yet here we both are." A faint smile curved his mouth. Genuine, not the cynical twist she had first known. "Here we are." She set her candle on the desk and moved to stand beside him at the window. The night air carried the scent of roses and distant rain. For a long moment they stood in silence, shoulders nearly touching, the space between them humming with unspoken tension. "You danced thrice tonight," he said at last, voice low. "With men whose fortunes could buy half of Yorkshire. Men whose conversation could bore a statue," she replied. "I endured for Clara's sake." He turned to face her fully. Moonlight silvered the sharp lines of his face, softened the scar on his cheek. "And for your own sake? What do you endure, Eleanor?" The use of her Christian name, rare, deliberate, sent warmth spiraling through her. "Far less than you imagine," she said. "I am not fragile." "No," he murmured. "You are not." His gaze dropped to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Eleanor felt her breath catch. She had spent years being useful, competent, the daughter who managed crises while others dreamed. No one had ever called her strong, as though it were a virtue rather than a necessity. Damien took a half-step closer. "These weeks, your plans, your patience, they have given me something I thought lost. Hope." His voice roughened. "But it is not only the estate I find myself thinking of at every moment." Her heart pounded against her ribs. "Damien!" He reached out, slowly enough that she could have stepped away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Tell me to stop and I will." She did not speak, could not. Instead she leaned into his touch, the smallest movement, but it was permission and invitation both. He bent his head and kissed her, gently at first, a question. When she responded, parting her lips beneath his, the kiss deepened into something urgent and reverent. His hand slid to the nape of her neck, cradling her as though she were both precious and unbreakable. Her own hands found purchase against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath linen and waistcoat. Time narrowed to the warmth of his mouth, the faint taste of wine on his tongue, the way his thumb traced slow circles against her skin. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, both were breathing unevenly. "This is madness," he whispered against her lips. "I have nothing to offer you, no security, no certainty. Only debts and a name that may soon mean little." "You have yourself," she answered, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And that is more than enough." His eyes searched hers, fierce and vulnerable. "You deserve better than a fallen viscount." "I deserve to choose," she said firmly. "And I choose you." He kissed her again, softer this time, sealing the words between them. When they drew apart, reality crept back in, the risk of discovery, the chasm of class and circumstance, the watchful eyes of society. "We must be careful," he said, though his arms remained around her. "Until the debts are manageable, until I can stand before your father without shame." "I am not afraid of careful," Eleanor replied. "I am only afraid of losing this before it has truly begun." He rested his cheek against her hair. "Then we will be careful, and we will win." Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, casting the garden in shifting shadow and light. Inside, two people who had long carried their burdens alone discovered the exquisite, terrifying relief of sharing them, and the even more exquisite danger of wanting far more than alliance. In the weeks that followed, desire became a quiet current beneath every interaction. A lingering glance across a ballroom, fingers brushing when passing a cup of tea, conversations that veered from crop yields to poetry and back again, each word weighted with subtext. Society saw a viscount reformed by responsibility and a merchant's daughter who moved in noble circles with calm assurance. Only they knew the truth, that every careful word, every restrained touch, was fuel on a fire neither could extinguish. But fires, left untended, have a way of flaring beyond control. If forbidden desire ignited in the shadows, would you risk everything to fan the flame, or douse it before it consumed you? Share your choice below as the heart of the story burns brighter. The idyll could not last. As July bled into August, the Tun's appetite for novelty sharpened. Whispers that had begun as idle curiosity about the reformed Viscount Blackwood's sudden sobriety, his frequent conferences with the Harrington heiress, coalesced into something more pointed. Lord Archibald Vance, a baronet of moderate fortune and immoderate spite, had long nursed resentment toward Damien. An old gambling debt forgiven too graciously, a perceived slight at White's years before. Vance watched, waited, and finally struck. It began at a crowded musicale hosted by Lady Jersey. Eleanor sat with Clara and Lydia in the second row, hands folded demurely, while a young lady mangled a Mozart sonata. Damien stood near the back with a cluster of gentlemen. His posture relaxed for the first time in years. Their eyes met across the room, a brief, warm glance that lingered a fraction too long. Vance noticed. Later, in the refreshment room, he cornered Damien with false bonhomie. "Blackwood, old fellow, quite the transformation. One might almost think you've turned monk." His laugh was loud, drawing heads. "Though I hear your monastic vigils are spent in the library with a certain practical young lady. Balancing books, is it?" Damien's expression iced over. "Mind your tongue, Vance. Oh, come now. We all admire enterprise, especially when it wears muslin and carries a dowry." Vance's smile was oily. "Tell me, does Mr. Harrington know his daughter is tutoring you in more than arithmetic?" The room quieted. Damien's hand flexed at his side, but he held his voice low. "You mistake courtesy for something baser. Apologize." "Or what?" Vance pressed, emboldened by wine and audience. "You'll call me out? With what funds? Everyone knows Blackwood is mortgaged to the hilt. Your father's folly, wasn't it? And now you court trade to patch the holes. Quite the romance." A muscle jumped in Damien's jaw. He stepped forward, voice lethal. "Enough!" But the seed was planted. By morning, the rumor had spread like wildfire through drawing rooms and clubs. Lord Blackwood, desperate and debauched, was angling for the Harrington fortune through seduction of the elder daughter, the plain, managing one no one else wanted. Eleanor heard it first from Clara, wide-eyed and tearful, repeating words overheard at a morning call. "They say you are compromising yourself to save him, that he is using you shamelessly." The words struck like blows. Eleanor kept her face composed, soothing her sister, but inside something cracked. She had known risk. She had not anticipated cruelty dressed as wit. That afternoon she sought Damien in the library. He was already there, pacing like a caged animal, a newspaper crumpled in his fist. "They print lies," he said without preamble, voice raw. "Vance has friends at the scandal sheets. They imply we've..." He could not finish. I know what they imply. Eleanor's tone was calm, but her hands trembled as she removed her gloves. Clara heard worse at Lady Sefton's. Damien crossed to her in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching her. This is my fault. I should have anticipated. Should have kept greater distance. Distance would not have silenced malice. She met his eyes, her own bright with unshed tears. But it wounds all the same. He reached for her then, pulling her gently into his arms. She went willingly, resting her forehead against his shoulder. For a moment they simply held each other, drawing strength from the contact. I will challenge Vance, he said against her hair. A duel will silence him. No, she pulled back, gripping his lapels. You will not risk your life, or Lydia's future, or your mother's, for gossip. We will endure it. But endurance proved harder than imagined. Invitations began to thin. Morning callers left cards but did not linger. Clara's suitors still came, drawn by beauty and dowry, but their mother's eyes were cooler. Mr. Harrington summoned Eleanor to his study one evening, his face grave. I have shielded you from much, daughter, but this cannot be ignored. Blackwood's circumstances are worse than rumored, and now your name is linked with his in ways that... He cleared his throat. I have had an offer for you. Mr. Whitby, solid, respectable, with shipping interests in Liverpool. He admires your steadiness. Eleanor's stomach lurched. Father, I am not commanding, he said heavily. Only asking you to consider. Security, respect, a life unshadowed by scandal. That night she did not sleep. She sat at her window watching moonlight silver the garden, feeling the walls of the careful future she and Damien had sketched closing in. Love was not enough, society whispered. Not when one party brought only a tarnished title and crushing debt. The following day, Damien found her in the conservatory among the orange trees. Her posture was rigid, hands clasped tightly. My mother has suggested I remove to the country, he said without greeting, to spare you further association. Eleanor turned. Her face was pale, composed, but her eyes held a despair that stopped his breath. Perhaps she is right, she said quietly. The words hung like a blade. Eleanor, I came here to help salvage an estate, she continued, voice steady only by effort. Not to drag my family into disgrace. Clara's prospects, my father's reputation, everything we sought to gain by this alliance is jeopardized. Because of us. He stepped closer, anguish in every line of his body. Then we fight it together. We marry quietly, weather the storm. With what? The question cracked like a whip. You have no settlement to offer. I have no fortune independent of my father. We would begin in poverty with society's doors closed. How long before resentment replaces love? Damien flinched as though struck. You believe I would resent you? I believe we are human, she whispered, and humans break under endless strain. Silence stretched, vast and terrible. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm approaching to match the one within. At last he spoke, voice hollow. If distance is what you wish, I will give it. He bowed, formal, devastating, and left her among the fragrant trees. That night Damien rode out alone, pushing his horse through rain-swept streets until exhaustion dulled the pain. Eleanor sat in her chamber until dawn, staring at the ringless hand that had once rested in his, wondering if strength meant holding on, or knowing when to let go. The abyss had opened between them, and for the first time, neither knew how to bridge it. When everything you've built threatens to destroy the person you love most, do you cling tighter, or release them? Tell me what you would do as the darkness deepens. The separation lasted precisely 9 days. 9 days of strained politeness at the breakfast table, of avoiding each other's eyes in crowded drawing rooms, of nights spent staring at opposite ceilings in adjoining wings of the house. For Damien, it was a descent into familiar numbness. He rode the estate from dawn to dusk, reviewing repairs with stewards, negotiating with tenants, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind blank. Brandy reappeared on his bedside table, though he touched it only once, pouring a glass and then hurling it into the fireplace when Eleanor's voice echoed in his memory. Humans break under endless strain. For Eleanor, the days were a slow erosion of certainty. She accompanied Clara to fittings and calls, smiled through conversations that felt like walking on glass, and watched her father's worry deepen with every cancelled invitation. Mr. Whitby called twice. Courteous, attentive, utterly safe, and each time she felt the walls closing tighter. At night she reviewed the estate plans alone, her pencil tracing figures that now seemed futile without Damien's steady presence across the desk. The turning point came unexpectedly, on a rain-soaked afternoon when the sky hung low and gray over Mayfair. Eleanor had retreated to the library, her sanctuary even in absence, seeking solace among the ledgers. She sat at the great mahogany table, papers spread before her, but her gaze kept drifting to Damien's empty chair. The numbers blurred. She pressed her fingers to her temples, fighting the ache behind her eyes. The door opened quietly. She looked up, expecting a servant, and found Lady Eleanora instead. The dowager closed the door and regarded her with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You look as though you have not slept in a week, my dear." Eleanor managed a faint smile. "I am quite well, my lady." "You are quite miserable," Lady Eleanora corrected, crossing to the window. Rain streaked the panes in relentless sheets. "And so is my son. I have watched him ride himself to exhaustion rather than remain in this house where you both pretend the other does not exist." Eleanor's throat tightened. It was the sensible choice. Sensible. Lady Eleanora turned, her voice gentle but edged with steel. "I have spent a lifetime being sensible, Eleanor. I married a charming man who hid ruin behind smiles. I protected my children from the worst of it until I could no longer. Sensible has kept us afloat, but it has not made us happy." She moved closer, resting a hand on the table beside Eleanor's scattered plans. "These figures, these careful, brilliant projections, are not the work of a woman indulging a whim. They are the work of a woman fighting for something she believes in. For someone." Eleanor's composure cracked. "I am trying to protect him, protect all of us." "By sacrificing yourself?" Lady Eleanora's tone softened. "I know that impulse well. I have lived it. But love is not a ledger where one column must balance the other by erasure. It is a risk, yes, but one worth taking when the alternative is slow suffocation." Silence fell, broken only by the rain's steady drum. At last Eleanor whispered, "I do not know how to undo what has been done. The gossip, the damage to Clara, to my father. Gossip fades when confronted with truth," Lady Eleanora said firmly. "And truth, my dear, is that my son loves you with a depth he has never shown another soul. He is too proud to beg, and you are too noble to demand. Someone must be brave enough to bridge the gulf." She pressed a small object into Eleanor's hand, a folded note in Damien's bold script, sealed with black wax. "He left this for me to deliver when I judged the moment right. I judge it now." Lady Eleanora left as quietly as she had come. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. "Eleanor, I have tried to be honorable. I have tried to release you from a future burdened by my failures. But honor without you is merely another form of ruin. I cannot promise wealth or ease. I can promise only this. Every day, I will strive to become the man worthy of the woman who saw possibility where I saw only defeat. If you can still bear the sight of me, if you can still believe in us, I will spend my life proving you right. I will be in the conservatory at dusk. Yours always, whether you will have me or not, Damien." The note shook in her hand. Tears blurred the ink, but the words burned clear. Dusk found her in the conservatory, among the orange trees heavy with blossom, their scent thick in the humid air. Rain still fell, softer now, pattering on the glass roof like a heartbeat. Damien waited beneath the central palm, coat unbuttoned, hair damp from the weather. When he saw her, hope and fear warred openly across his face. She crossed the tiled floor without hesitation and stopped an arm's length away. "I was wrong," she said simply. "Distance does not protect. It only starves what is living between us." His breath left him in a rush. "Eleanor, I am tired of being sensible at the expense of being alive." She stepped closer. "I choose you. Debts, gossip, uncertainty, all of it. I choose us." Damien closed the distance in one stride, cupping her face in hands that trembled. "Then marry me. Not in some distant future when everything is perfect, because it may never be. Marry me now, and we will make it perfect together." "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "1,000 times, yes." He kissed her then, fierce, reverent, a vow sealed in rain-scented air and orange blossom. When they drew apart, foreheads touching, laughter bubbled up between them, incredulous and joyous. "We will face the storm," he murmured. "Together," she answered. Outside, the rain began to ease, clouds parting to reveal the first stars. Inside, two people who had nearly lost each other to fear and pride chose, irrevocably, to burn brighter than the darkness. The spark had caught. Now it would become a blaze no gossip could extinguish. When love demands everything and offers no guarantees, do you take the leap? Share your thoughts below. The fire is about to consume all doubt. The Blackwood Ball was the Dowager's masterpiece, the crowning event of the season, designed to silence doubters and cement the alliance between ancient title and new fortune. Invitations had been coveted for weeks. The Mayfair house gleamed with fresh polish, every chandelier ablaze, hothouse flowers banked in extravagant profusion. 300 of the ton's most influential filled the ballroom, silk and satin swirling beneath a ceiling painted with mythical gods indifferent to mortal strife. Eleanor moved through the crush on Damien's arm, her gown of deep emerald silk catching the light, auburn hair dressed with simple pearls. She smiled, nodded, endured the curious glances and whispered speculations. Beside her, Damien was impeccable in midnight blue, the picture of restrained elegance, but she felt the tension coiled in his frame, the way his hand tightened fractionally on hers whenever Vance's name was mentioned in passing. They had agreed. Tonight would be their quiet triumph. A formal announcement of courtship, sanctioned proper, would transform gossip into accepted fact. Doors would reopen. Creditors would extend terms. The future they had planned in stolen hours would begin to take shape. But Vance had other intentions. He struck near midnight, when the orchestra paused between sets and conversations swelled to fill the lull. Eleanor had stepped away to fetch lemonade for Lydia when Vance intercepted her near the refreshment table, his face flushed with wine and triumph. "Miss Harrington," he drawled, loud enough for nearby groups to hear. "A word, if you please." She stiffened but kept her voice cool. "I am attending my sister, sir. It will take but a moment." He leaned closer, breath sour. "To congratulate you on your conquest. Taming Blackwood with nothing but ledgers and virtue. What a feat, though I wonder how long the leash will hold once the dowry is spent." Heads turned. Fans stilled. Eleanor's pulse hammered, but she lifted her chin. "You mistake industry for manipulation, Lord Vance. A common error among those unfamiliar with either." A titter rippled through the listeners. Vance's smile thinned to a snarl. "Bold words from trade," he sneered. "We all know why you're here, purchasing a title for your sister while warming the Viscount's bed in advance. Tell me, does your father approve the bargain?" The ballroom hushed. Eleanor felt every eye upon her, the weight of judgment descending like a blade. Damien appeared at her side in an instant, his face pale with fury. "You will apologize," he said, voice low and lethal. "Now." Vance laughed. "Or what, Blackwood? You'll duel a man for speaking truth? Everyone knows your father gambled away the estate. Everyone knows you're desperate. Betting the merchant's daughter is merely the latest wager." Gasps echoed. Eleanor saw her father's face across the room. Shocked, stricken. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Lady Eleonora began pushing through the crowd, expression thunderous. Damien stepped forward, every inch the aristocrat honed to a dangerous edge. Name your seconds, Vance. Dawn. Pistols. The challenge hung in the air, irrevocable. But Eleanor moved first. She stepped onto the low dais where the orchestra waited, her voice cutting clear through the stunned silence. "My lords and ladies," she began, chin high. "Lord Vance is mistaken on one crucial point." The room held its breath. "Lord Blackwood has not seduced me." She paused, letting the words settle. "I have seduced him." A collective inhale swept the ballroom. Fans snapped open like gunfire. Somewhere a glass shattered. Eleanor continued, voice steady as steel. "I have spent months in his company, reviewing his accounts, planning his salvation, and in that time I have come to love him beyond reason or prudence. If there is scandal, let it be mine. Let it be the truth. That a woman of sense and independence chose a man of honor and courage, debts and all." She turned to Damien, eyes blazing. "And I choose him still." For one heartbeat, silence reigned absolute. Then Damien strode through the parted crowd, mounted the dais in 2 strides, and took her hand. "And I," he declared, voice ringing to the furthest corner, "am the most fortunate man in England. Miss Harrington has consented to be my wife, not for title, not for fortune, but for love. Let any who doubt it speak now." No one did. Vance stood marooned in a sea of turned backs, his triumph curdled to ash. Lady Eleanora reached the dais, her smile fierce and radiant as she took Eleanor's other hand. Mr. Harrington arrived moments later, face working with emotion. He looked at his daughter, at the woman who had just risked everything for love, and slowly bowed to Damien. "You have my blessing," he said gruffly. "God help us all." The orchestra, recovering, struck up a triumphant waltz. Couples flooded the floor as though by signal. The ton, capricious, sensation-loving, decided in that instant to be enchanted. A love match born of defiance? A merchant's daughter claiming a viscount with bold honesty? It was irresistible. Damien drew Eleanor into the dance, his hand at her waist possessive and reverent. "You extraordinary creature," he murmured against her ear. "You have ruined yourself gloriously." "I have freed us," she answered, smiling up at him through sudden tears. "And I would do it again." As they spun beneath the blazing chandeliers, the storm broke at last. Not in destruction, but in dazzling light. The tempest had come, and they had met it together. Unbowed, unbroken, and finally, undeniably victorious. The blaze no longer threatened to consume them. It illuminated the path ahead. If you stood at the edge of ruin for love, would you leap or rewrite the rules? The climax has passed. Share how this moment moved you as we approach the dawn.